Millionaire CEO paid a homeless woman for a baby. But what he saw at birth changed everything. It started with a lie. Not the kind that hurts someone. The kind that protects you from hope, from disappointment, from being seen. She sat across from him in an oversized sweater, thick glasses slipping down her nose, hair pulled into a messy knot like she hadn't slept in days. And maybe she hadn't. He was the type of man women don't look in the eye. Grayson West. The name alone could buy a city block. Boston's most powerful billionaire CEO and most emotionally unavailable man. Yet as Sophie stirred her coffee with trembling fingers, she caught him staring. Not at her body, not at the mess she'd made of herself, but through it. Like he was trying to find the version of her she was hiding and didn't want found. Then he said something no man ever had. "You don't need to impress me, Sophie. I already know who you are under the act." Her heart dropped, because somehow, in a room full of pretending, he was the only one who wasn't. And the next words he spoke would change everything. "Marry me. Just for a few months. No one gets hurt." But he was wrong. Someone would. Poor girl pretends to be ugly on a blind date. But the millionaire CEO proposed anyway. Sophie Lane used to believe love was about being seen. Then life taught her it was about hiding. She wasn't always this careful. At 22, she'd been the girl who laughed too loud, who dreamed too big, who walked into a room hoping someone, anyone, would choose her for her heart. But the world hadn't been kind to girls like Sophie. Pretty wasn't protection. It was a weapon used against her in ways that still kept her up at night. Men didn't fall in love with Sophie. They fell in love with the idea of her. And when she broke that idea, when she cried, when she simply wasn't enough, they left. So she made herself small, muted the color in her voice, hid the light in her eyes. And when her sister Nora begged her to go on just one blind date, "He's successful, he's single, he's not a creep, come on, Soph," she agreed. But not without a plan. She wore the ugliest sweater she owned, tangled her hair into a frazzled bun, skipped mascara, faked a limp. If he could fall for that version of her, then maybe, just maybe, she'd listen. She never expected it would be him. The man at the corner table wasn't just rich, he was Grayson West. Billionaire CEO, real estate mogul. The kind of man who didn't need Tinder. He was the algorithm. She almost turned around, but then he looked up and didn't flinch. He didn't leer, he didn't scan her body, he didn't fake politeness. He just studied her, quietly, deeply, like she wasn't background noise. The silence between them stretched, not awkward, but electric. Sophie cleared her throat. "I know what this looks like," she whispered, trying to smile through the anxiety. "And trust me, it's intentional." He raised an eyebrow. "Good?" It caught her off guard. "You came here hiding," he said, his voice like cool metal. "I came here hoping for honesty. Maybe we both got what we wanted." She blinked, stunned. "You're not leaving?" He leaned back. "No. I think I just found the most honest woman in Boston." Sophie felt something shift, not in the room, but in herself. Fear, curiosity, and something she hadn't felt in years. Danger. Not the kind that harms, the kind that sees. The waiter brought their drinks. She sipped hers just to have something to do with her hands. Grayson said nothing. He didn't ask what she did for work, didn't compliment her eyes, didn't try to impress her. He just sat there, watching, like she was the only story worth reading. And then, just as she thought she'd made it through dinner without cracking, he said, "You're not fooling me, Sophie. You're beautiful. But that's not what caught my attention." She froze. "What did then?" she asked, barely above a whisper. His reply was soft, unshakable. "You look like someone who's been invisible for too long." That was when she knew this wasn't going to be like the others. But she still didn't know the truth. That this man, this billionaire with the frozen heart, didn't come to the restaurant looking for love. He came looking for a solution. And Sophie was about to become the center of a deal that had nothing to do with feelings. until feelings became the only thing that mattered. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Hides Herself. She had spent most of her life making herself small. Not in the way people shrink when they're shy. No, Sophie Lane had learned to disappear in plain sight. At work, she was the quiet one who remembered everyone's coffee orders, but no one remembered her birthday. On the bus, she sat by the window, knees tucked in, as if taking up less space would keep the world from touching her. It was safer that way. Safer not to be seen. Because every time she had been noticed, it ended in something breaking. Her heart, her hope, her voice. So when her sister begged her to go on a blind date, Sophie did what she always did when life asked too much. She pretended. She put on the shapeless sweater with the fraying sleeves, the one that made her shoulders disappear. She tied her hair back so tightly it erased every curve of her face. She added her thick glasses, even though the prescription was years out of date. And she didn't wear a hint of makeup. She wanted the man to lose interest, that was the point. She didn't want love. She wanted to prove love wouldn't look twice at her without a disguise. But Grayson West looked twice, and then a third time. He didn't smile when she walked in. He didn't look disappointed either, he just watched. Like a man who was used to seeing through people, not around them. She sat across from him, heart racing, lips pressed into a flat, safe line. "I'm not what you were expecting," she said, trying to inject humor into the moment. "I know I look like a librarian who got lost on the way to the DMV." He didn't laugh. "No," he said, voice quiet. "You look like someone hiding something precious." The words made her chest tighten. He folded his hands on the table, his movements precise, intentional. "Tell me something, Sophie. Why did you come like this?" She shrugged, eyes lowered. "To be honest, I wanted to scare you off. And did it work? I'm still talking, aren't I?" He tilted his head slightly. "I'm used to people wearing masks. Yours is just more honest." She didn't know what to say to that. It should have annoyed her. It should have ended there, some awkward goodbye, a handshake, a polite escape. But instead, something held them both in place. Not attraction. Not chemistry, something quieter, like recognition. They spoke little through dinner. She picked at her salad, he sipped black coffee. Yet every second stretched long and strange, like time had slowed to listen in. At the end, she reached for the check, a habit of defense, but he had already covered it. "I didn't come here to find a date," he said calmly, "and you didn't come here to be seen." Sophie froze. "I came to make a deal," he continued, "one that requires someone who isn't interested in impressing me. Someone real, someone with nothing to prove." She blinked. "What kind of deal?" He reached into his coat, pulled out a single cream-colored envelope and slid it across the table. Sophie stared at it, then at him. "You brought a contract to a blind date?" "I don't do anything blindly." A long pause. Her fingers hovered over the envelope, then pulled back. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A proposal," he said, standing, "but not the kind you're thinking." As he walked out, he paused beside her chair. "You said you wanted to scare me off. But you didn't. You intrigued me." Then lower, almost like a confession. "I don't know why." And he was gone. Sophie sat alone in that cafe for a long time, the envelope untouched, her breath shaky. She should have laughed. She should have thrown it away. But she didn't. Because for the first time in years, someone had looked at her, really looked, and instead of pity, they offered a question. A question that terrified her more than anything else. What if I've been hiding something worth seeing all along? Chapter 2. The CEO's Proposition. The envelope sat on her nightstand for 2 days. Sophie didn't open it. She couldn't. It felt like something sacred, or dangerous. Like a thread that, if pulled, would unravel the version of herself she had carefully stitched together over the years. She worked double shifts at the diner, kept her head down, and told no one about the man in the suit who had left her a deal instead of a compliment. But she thought about him. Not just his face, though it had a kind of elegance that made you forget how cold it looked. No. She thought about his stillness, like someone who had seen too much, and decided feeling was no longer worth the risk. That night, when the diner had emptied and the only sound left was the buzz of the neon sign outside, she finally tore the envelope open. Her fingers shook. Inside was a letter. No greeting, just words, direct, typed, mercilessly clear. Sophie, I need someone to play a role. For 3 months, I want you to pretend to be my fiancée. No intimacy, no obligations beyond appearances. You'll be paid well, extremely well, and when it's over, you walk away with enough to start over. All I ask is that you don't lie to me, not about who you are. She read it again, and again. There was a phone number at the bottom. His name wasn't even on it. That night she barely slept, her thoughts tangled between laughter and fear. Was this some kind of twisted test? Some elitist game? But beneath the confusion, a flicker of temptation burned. Because what kind of man offers a fake engagement to a woman like her? And what kind of life lets her keep waiting tables for pennies while her dreams wither like unpaid bills? The next morning, she called the number. He answered on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call. I haven't said yes, but you didn't throw it away. Silence. I want to hear it from you, she said. What exactly do you want from me? His voice was as measured as ever. Appearances. There's a merger I'm finalizing with a conservative board of investors. They trust men who appear stable. Engaged men. Men who look like they can commit. And you can't fake that with anyone else. I've tried. Beautiful women with soft hands and expensive shoes. They all turn into liabilities. You want anything from me? Sophie felt the insult, but it didn't sting, because it was true. She didn't want his money. She didn't want his world. She just wanted one thing, to be free. And the money? She asked. He named a figure. She blinked. That's insane. That's 3 months of pretending, he said flatly. No more, no less. She could already hear Nora's voice, scolding her, protecting her, reminding her that people like him only look down at girls like her when they need something disposable. But she could also hear the rent notices piling up on the kitchen table. She whispered, "What's the catch?" "No catch. You follow my schedule, you follow the story. You keep your life private, I keep mine. And when it's over, you'll never hear from me again." Something about that last line hollowed her out. Not because she wanted more, but because it reminded her how disposable she was in his eyes. "Let me think," she said. "You have until midnight." He hung up. That night she stood barefoot in the middle of her room, the contract spread across her mattress like a map to another universe. Fake fiancé. 3 months. No strings. No kisses. No love. Just performance. But as she stared down at her own trembling signature, she realized something that made her chest ache. She was agreeing to be chosen only because it wasn't real. And part of her felt safer that way. Chapter 3. A deal with cold hands. The black car that arrived outside her apartment wasn't just a vehicle. It was a statement. Glossy, silent, and intimidating. Like the man inside it, the driver didn't say a word, just opened the door and waited. Sophie slid into the back seat with a knot in her stomach, clutching her thrift store purse like a life vest. Her reflection in the tinted window looked like someone else entirely. Not the Sophie who scraped tips to survive, but a shadow of someone stepping into something she wasn't ready for. When they pulled up to the building, she wasn't surprised it had no name. Just a towering wall of glass and steel, too perfect to feel human. The elevator made no sound. The hallway smelled like money. Cold, clean, clinical. And when the doors opened to the penthouse, Grayson West was already waiting. He stood in the center of the room like he owned the skyline, dressed in slate gray, sharp angles, emotionless eyes. "You came," he said. No smile, no warmth. "You left out the part where your apartment looks like a Bond villain's," she muttered, stepping inside. He didn't react. "I like silence," he said, "and control." She glanced around. Glass walls, minimalist furniture, not a single photo or fingerprint out of place. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but it doesn't feel like anyone lives here." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's because no one does." A pause settled between them, heavy, fragile. He motioned to the coffee table. The contract was laid out again, this time printed in fine black ink on heavier paper. Her name in all caps. Her role, temporary partner in engagement agreement. "You'll be required to attend 2 formal events per week," he began, tone clinical. "You'll wear what's provided, speak only when spoken to, smile occasionally but not too much. Investors don't trust desperation." She raised an eyebrow. "You've done this before?" "I've managed appearances before," he corrected. She scanned the document again. Her chest tightened at the final clause. "The participant agrees to all terms with full understanding that no emotional obligations will exist on either side. No love, no friendship, not even kindness, apparently." "Do you always make people sign away their humanity?" she asked, only half joking. He looked at her, really looked, and for a flicker of a second, something cracked in his eyes. "No," he said quietly. "Just the ones I don't want to hurt." She didn't know what to do with that, so she said nothing. He handed her a pen. Her hand trembled just slightly as she signed. When it was done, he slid the paper into a leather folder and stood. "I'll have a car pick you up tomorrow at 6, he said. "We'll be photographed leaving the mansion together." "Mansion?" "It's part of the illusion," he replied. "No one believes a man like me falls for a woman in a walk-up apartment." The word stung more than she expected. And maybe he saw it, because after a beat he added, "You're not less than anyone, Sophie. You're just not what they expect." She swallowed hard. "And what do you expect?" His expression didn't change, but his voice did. "Nothing. That's why this works." She nodded, turned, and started toward the door. But just as her hand touched the handle, he said it, so low she almost missed it. "Don't let this change you." She paused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't get used to being seen. It doesn't last." She didn't answer, because the truth was she wasn't used to being seen. At all. And even now, under a contract, in borrowed air, she wasn't sure if she wanted to be. As the door closed behind her, Grayson stood in the quiet, staring at the place where she'd stood. She was just a part of the plan. But something about the way her voice trembled when she said, "What do you expect?" kept echoing in his head. A question he didn't know how to answer. Not anymore. Chapter 4. The mask starts to crack. It was supposed to be simple. She would wear the dresses, he would say the right things. They would smile, wave, pose, and go back to their corners of emptiness. But simplicity has a way of breaking under the weight of small, human things. Like how she hummed while walking barefoot through the marble halls of his mansion, unaware he could hear. Like how she whispered thank you to the maid after every breakfast. Like how she never touched the flowers in the vases but always stopped to look at them, as if wondering whether they were real. Grayson watched. He told himself it was habit, analyzing behavior, controlling the variables. But the truth felt closer to obsession. Sophie Lane was a contradiction wrapped in wool sleeves. Quiet, yet filled with unspoken fire. Invisible, yet magnetic in her stillness. And he hated how she unsettled him. On the 4th night, they had their first real event together. A fundraiser gala hosted by one of Grayson's longtime investors. Sophie wore a navy gown selected by his stylist, simple and elegant, but her hand shook as the zipper went up. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. "I look like someone you'd never talk to," she murmured. "You look like someone the world's finally paying attention to," Stephanie, the assistant, said kindly. But Sophie didn't want attention, not from strangers, and especially not from him. At the gala, flashbulbs lit the entrance like lightning storms. Sophie clutched Grayson's arm tighter than she meant to, and instead of flinching, he leaned down slightly and said, "They do matter if you believe they do." It was the first thing he'd said all day that didn't feel rehearsed. The cameras flashed. He didn't smile. She did. And when they entered the ballroom, something strange happened. People moved aside for them. Sophie, who'd always been the background in someone else's picture, suddenly felt like the frame. Later that evening, when the crowd had shifted and the speeches began, she slipped out to the terrace for air. Her chest ached from the pressure of pretending. She didn't notice he had followed her until she heard his voice behind her. "You disappeared." She turned. "I needed a second to breathe. That okay with you, Mr. West?" He didn't respond right away. His gaze swept over her, slowly, like he was seeing something he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge until now. Then he said it softly. "Why do you hide?" The question hit harder than it should have. She looked away. "Why do you care?" "I don't." "Liar." He stepped closer. "You're not what I expected, and I don't like surprises." Sophie almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You picked me because I didn't scare easy, because I wouldn't ask for anything, not love, not attention, just a paycheck." His jaw tightened. "Yes. Then why are you looking at me like that?" Silence. "Like what?" he asked finally. She took a slow breath, turned to face him fully. "Like you're trying not to feel something." That froze him. Neither of them moved. Not when the wind picked up, tugging at her hair. Not when the music inside swelled, muffled behind glass. It was the kind of stillness that comes right before something important breaks. Sophie was the first to look away. "You're safe with me, Grayson. I'm not here to change you." He didn't reply. But that night, when he returned to his office alone, he poured a glass of scotch and sat in the dark, watching the contract she signed sit untouched on his desk. He'd drawn it up to protect himself, but somehow she'd become the one shielding him. And the worst part was, he was starting to wonder if he wanted the protection at all. Chapter 5. A past that won't stay buried. She thought she'd buried it. The years of silence. The death. The name she tried to forget. Sophie Lane had spent her entire adult life trying to outrun the family that left her behind. But the internet doesn't forget. And neither do people with power. It started with a whisper. A tabloid headline. Just a blip at the bottom of a gossip blog. Who is Sophie Lane? Billionaire's fiancée may not be who she claims. She found it by accident, scrolling while waiting for Grayson's driver outside the boutique. Her stomach dropped. He clicked, and there it was. A photo of her when she was 19, disheveled, eyes swollen, clutching a trash bag outside a courthouse. Underneath it, the words, "Strange daughter of convicted fraud accountant seen on West's arm." She dropped her phone. By the time she got home, it was everywhere. News anchors speculating, Twitter dissecting, podcasts dragging her from every angle, some defending, most mocking. Grayson was already waiting in the living room, standing like a statue carved out of fire and steel. He didn't yell. He didn't ask questions. He just handed her a glass of water and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She didn't drink. "I thought it didn't matter. I thought..." Her voice cracked. "I thought I could leave it behind." He studied her, and for the first time, she didn't see coldness in his eyes. She saw calculation. She saw damage control. "I can spin this," he said, as if reading a business report. "We'll shift the narrative. I'll say we met through charity work. You were working your way through school. You kept your past hidden out of humility." Her heart splintered. "Humility," she whispered. "That's the story. Oh, it's cleaner than the truth." She took a step back. "So, I'm a liability now?" He didn't answer, and that silence hurt more than anything he could have said. Later that night, she sat in the guest room staring at the mirror, her face bare, the borrowed gown crumpled at her feet. She looked like a stranger. The old fear returned, the one she thought she'd escaped. He remembered her father's trial, the cameras, the reporters yelling her name while she sobbed behind her mother's coat. She remembered the judgment. And now, it was happening again. Except this time, she'd handed them the knife herself. The next morning, she walked into Grayson's office with a single sentence. "I'll leave. Today." He didn't look up. "You signed a contract," he said coldly. "I also still have dignity," she said, voice firmer than she felt. He finally lifted his eyes, and for a moment there was a crack in the mask. "Sophie," he started. "No," she shook her head. "You don't get to save face with me and hide your heart." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "I never said I didn't care," he said quietly. She froze. He stood up slowly, walked toward her like he was afraid she might disappear. "I just don't know how to care without breaking everything I touch." That hit her harder than any headline. And against every ounce of self-preservation in her bones, she whispered, "Then let me teach you." His breath caught. They stood inches apart. No script, no contract, just two broken pasts colliding. And in that fragile space between them, something shifted. Not love. Not yet, but maybe. The possibility of it. Chapter 6. The Winter Garden. Scene. It was the only place in the mansion that felt alive. Tucked behind the east wing, hidden behind frost-kissed glass, the Winter Garden was never mentioned in the contract. No one spoke of it. No one cleaned it. It simply existed. Overgrown, untamed, and forgotten. Until Sophie found it. It started with a creak in the hallway floorboards, a draft of air that smelled like cedar and dust. One afternoon, she followed it through an unmarked door and stepped into a room where silence lived. Ivy curled along the stone walls. Potted camellias, wilted but stubborn, stood like sentinels. And in the middle of it all, a single wrought iron bench dusted with time. Sophie sat there often, in the late hours, when the house was quiet and the questions inside her grew too loud. She wasn't supposed to belong in places like this. But neither did the flowers. And still, both kept blooming. That night, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn. She already knew it was him. "I wondered where you kept disappearing to," Grayson said, his voice gentler than usual. "You don't come back here. Not since my mother died." She turned, surprised. "She planted most of this," he said, his gaze sweeping the dim-lit greenery. "Said life needed a place to breathe. I thought it was pointless." Sophie ran her hand along the edge of a frost-bitten leaf. "It doesn't look pointless to me." Grayson walked over and sat beside her on the bench, but not too close. Close enough to feel the cold between them. "You've been quiet," she said. He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice dropped low. "I saw what they wrote about you." "I know. And I saw how you didn't defend yourself. What would be the point? To remind them you're not who your father was." Sophie looked at him. Her eyes were tired, her voice even more so. "You think the world cares about who I really am?" He met her gaze then, and for the first time, there was no mask. No agenda. Just a man, struggling with something he couldn't articulate. "I care," he said. It was barely audible, but it shattered something in her anyway. "I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. "You're not. I don't want to be another chapter in your list of regrets." "You're not," he said again, but this time his voice broke slightly. They sat in silence. The garden, the frost, the unfinished life between them. "You ever think about what this would look like if it wasn't fake?" Sophie asked. He turned his head slightly. "I try not to." "Why?" "Because the second I want it to be real," he paused, "I lose control." She exhaled, a trembling sound. "You don't have to control everything, Grayson." He looked down at his hands. For the first time they were shaking. "It's the only way I survive." "No," she said quietly. "It's the way you stay alone." The words settled between them, still and sharp. And then, something unspoken passed. She reached for his hand, slowly, gently, and placed hers on top. He didn't pull away. Not this time. And as they sat there in the cold light of the winter garden, something impossible began to thaw. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was no longer a transaction either. It was something in between. Something dangerous. Something alive. Chapter 7. Almost something. The rooftop was the only place in the mansion that didn't feel curated. No polished marble, no staged elegance, no silent staff floating in the background. Just open air, worn stone tiles, and the sound of the city below. A dull hum reminding them both that the world hadn't stopped, even if something inside them had. Sophie sat on the ledge, knees pulled into her chest, the cold wind catching wisps of her hair. Above her, the stars blinked through a gauze of light pollution, soft and unreachable. She didn't hear him come up. But she felt it, the shift in the air, the weight of another heartbeat in the silence. "You're avoiding me," Grayson said. She didn't look up. Not very successfully, apparently. A pause, then footsteps. He sat a few feet away, leaving enough space between them to pretend they weren't thinking about each other every second. "I didn't mean for it to get this complicated," he said. Sophie gave a hollow laugh. "That's funny. Complication seems to be the one thing you do better than anyone." He didn't respond, just stared out into the dark. After a moment, she whispered, "Do you ever feel like the whole world forgot you, even when you're standing in the middle of it?" He turned to her, "All the time." They sat in that answer. "I thought if I played this part long enough," she continued, "I'd remember who I was pretending to be. But now, I don't know what's real anymore." He shifted closer, not quite touching. "When I'm with you," he said, "it's the only time I don't feel like a ghost." Her breath caught. That was the thing about him. Grayson never said much, but when he did, it cracked something wide open. Sophie looked over at him, searching his face for the man beneath the armor. And for once, he didn't look away. "If I kiss you now," he said softly, "this isn't a game anymore." Her lips parted, but no words came. She didn't nod, she didn't run. He leaned in. Their foreheads touched first, a brush of warmth in the cold, then her nose, her cheek, his breath mixing with hers. And then a kiss. Slow, uncertain, not hungry or polished like some scripted moment, but raw. Two people on the edge of a feeling neither of them could name. Her hand found his jacket. His fingers brushed her jaw. And for a second, they weren't contracts and roles and borrowed lives. They were just two broken people, holding the only thing that felt safe. But Sophie pulled away. It wasn't dramatic, just quiet, a breath, a step back, a whispered "I'm sorry" that hurt more than a scream. Grayson stayed still. His jaw clenched, his shoulders hardened again, as if every vulnerable piece of him had been sealed back into place. "I can't be just a role in your perfect plan," she said, voice trembling. "And I don't know how to be anything else in this." He stood slowly, his eyes distant. "That's exactly why I don't let people in." She looked up at him. "Then why me?" He didn't answer, just walked away. And when the rooftop door clicked shut behind him, it echoed like a door slamming in her chest. The next morning, the house felt different, colder, quieter, like it had swallowed the night whole. They didn't speak over breakfast, didn't make eye contact, didn't even sit at the same table. Stephanie, ever polite, picked up on the tension and retreated quickly, leaving them in a silence thick enough to choke on. Sophie sat in the library afterward, curled in the same armchair she always used, pretending to read the same page over and over. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her sleeve. Her mind was loud. Did last night happen, or did I dream it? She had felt his heart, felt him breathe into her, as if she was the first person he'd let past his defenses in years. And still she ran. Because that's what people like her did. They left before they were left. Upstairs, Grayson sat at his desk. The contract lay unopened in the drawer. Instead, in front of him sat a blank sheet of paper. His pen hovered, untouched. He had written and rewritten the first line 5 times. "I didn't expect you to, Matter." Then, "Last night was a mistake." Then scratched that out. Finally, he just wrote, "I wanted to say something real, but I couldn't." He folded the note, tucked it into the drawer, left it there, like a confession he didn't know how to give. That evening, Sophie walked the halls again. She passed his study, the door slightly ajar. She wasn't going to stop, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe heartache, pulled her in. He wasn't there. But the desk drawer was open. She saw the paper. Just the edge. She shouldn't have read it. But she did. And when she read the words, she didn't cry. She felt them. because she had written the same sentence to herself 100 times in a journal no one had ever seen. I wanted to say something real, but I couldn't. She folded the note back, quietly, gently, closed the drawer, and stood there for a long time, not thinking, just feeling. Later, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she whispered into the dark, "Maybe it was never fake to me." And that scared her more than anything else. Because if this wasn't fake, if this was almost something, then losing it would hurt in a way nothing else had. But maybe it was worth the risk. Chapter 8. The Proposal Twist. The invitation came 3 days later. An ivory envelope, thick with gold-trimmed edges, slid under her door like an omen. Inside, cursive letters danced across elegant paper. "You are cordially invited to the Westfall Foundation Annual Gala." And beneath it, in cold black ink, Grayson West and guest. No note, no explanation, just a summons. Sophie stared at it for a long time, the corner of the paper trembling in her grip. He hadn't spoken to her since the rooftop. Not once. He moved around the mansion like a ghost again, silent, controlled, untouchable. She should have said no. Should have left the envelope unopened and packed her bag and walked away from the lie they both kept feeding. But she didn't, because she wasn't ready to disappear again. Not yet. The stylist returned, all warm smiles and fabric swatches, talking in soft tones that never asked Sophie what she wanted, just what looked good beside Grayson. They picked an emerald gown that wrapped around her body like water, soft, weightless, elegant. She didn't recognize herself in the mirror, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. When the car pulled up to the gala, Grayson was already inside. He didn't greet her, didn't compliment her, didn't look at her long enough to give anything away. But when their eyes met, there was a flicker, a storm passing through glass. He cleared his throat. "We'll be photographed at the entrance. Hand on mine, smile, say nothing unless prompted." Her fingers twitched, just like always. The words stung more than she intended. They arrived under a blur of lights and whispers. Paparazzi crowded the steps, flashes popping like fireworks. Grayson stepped out first, polished and statuesque. Sophie followed, heart pounding beneath silk. The cameras turned toward them like wolves. And as they stood together, arms linked, masks on, she told herself this was just another night in the illusion. But she felt him glance at her. And it wasn't performance. It was something else. The ballroom glittered in gold and glass. Laughter rang out from faces painted in charm and champagne. It was a world built to distract, from fear, from loneliness, from truth. Grayson made his rounds like a machine. Sophie followed 2 steps behind, smiling when expected, saying little. She could feel the eyes on her, the judgment, the curiosity, the quiet calculations of people who saw only what they wanted to. She hated every second. Until he pulled her aside. "Come with me," he said under his breath. She didn't ask why, she just followed him through the crowd, past velvet curtains, and into a smaller chamber lined with books and antique glass. "What is this?" she asked. He turned, and his expression was different. Less controlled. More terrified. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a box. Small, black, closed. Her throat tightened. "What are you doing?" "I don't know," he said. And then right there, without cameras, without scripts, he got down on one knee. Not for show. Not for business. But because something inside him had finally broken free. "I wasn't supposed to feel anything," he said, voice shaking. "This was never meant to go beyond the contract, but it did, and I can't go back." Her hands trembled. "You're joking." He opened the box. A ring. Simple. Honest. No diamonds. Just a gold band and a heart in his eyes she didn't think he still had. "I'm not asking for an answer right now," he whispered. "I just need you to know I see you, all of you, and I don't want this to be fake anymore." Sophie froze. Time stopped. All she could hear was her pulse in her ears. "You weren't supposed to mean it," she said, voice cracking. "None of this was supposed to mean anything." He stood slowly, still holding the ring. "But it did. It means everything." Tears welled in her eyes. "Grayson, I don't know how to trust this. I don't know how to believe it's not just another part of the story. He stepped closer. Then let me rewrite it, he said. With you. But she couldn't answer. Not then. Not with that many ghosts still whispering in her ear. So she turned and walked away. Back at the mansion, she didn't sleep. She sat on the floor of her bedroom, the gown pooled around her, her bare feet cold against marble, her hands still trembling from the feel of his voice, his gaze, his risk. She wanted to believe him, but she'd learned long ago words were easy. Actions meant everything. And the next move would be hers. Chapter 9. The Disappearance. The note was short. Just 6 words. I need to remember who I am. Grayson found it on the edge of her bed, her room cold, the curtains still drawn back from last night. Her dress was gone, so were her shoes. So was she. The silence in the mansion didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like abandonment. And for the first time in years, Grayson West didn't have a plan. She took the train. No limo, no security. Just Sophie Lane, a worn backpack, and a hoodie too big for her shoulders. She didn't cry. Not until she passed the last stop on the red line and stepped back into the neighborhood she thought she'd never return to. The street where she used to walk home after double shifts, where corner stores smelled like dust and desperation, and where no one looked twice at the girl in secondhand shoes. She stayed with her Aunt Maggie in the same faded house that still had plastic over the sofa and hand-me-down blankets stacked like treasure. You came back with more in your eyes than when you left, her aunt said gently that night after Sophie had showered and put on an old high school t-shirt. Sophie didn't answer. She just curled her knees into her chest and whispered, I don't know who I am anymore. Maggie tucked the blanket tighter around her. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Grayson searched. Not loudly, not with threats or news stories, but quietly, desperately. He checked her favorite bookstore, her coffee shop, the Winter Garden. He even called Stephanie in the middle of the night and asked with a voice so strained it didn't sound like him, Do you think she'll come back? Stephanie answered gently, I think she's waiting to see if you will. Days passed, 3, then 4. He couldn't work, couldn't think. Every room in the mansion reminded him of her. The teacup she always left half-filled, the sketchbook she tucked between couch cushions, the tiny dent in the hallway wall where she'd tripped and laughed harder than he'd ever heard. And worst of all, the space beside him in bed that had never been filled. Until her. The proposal had been real. Too real. And now he was paying the price for being late to his own heart. On the 5th day, it rained. Grayson put on a coat and walked. No driver, no umbrella. Just miles of sidewalk and regret. He ended up outside a diner, one of the ones she used to talk about when she thought he wasn't listening. And there, behind the glass, he saw her. Hair damp from the rain, apron tied, pen behind her ear. Taking orders like she had never left. Like she'd never been touched by wealth, or kissed beneath stars, or proposed to by a man who couldn't find the words in time. He stood there for a long time, watching her smile at strangers, pretending he wasn't breaking. And then, without permission, his feet carried him inside. The bell above the door jingled softly. She turned, froze. For a moment, no one moved. And then she walked toward him. Slow, cautious, brave. What are you doing here? She asked. His voice was gravel. Looking for the girl I lost? You didn't lose me, she said. You just didn't know what to do with me. I know now. A pause. He stepped closer. I've spent my whole life choosing safety over connection, money over meaning. And then you walked in, dressed like you wanted to be invisible. And I couldn't stop seeing you. Tears filled her eyes. You proposed in a back room, Grayson. No warning, no heart. Just a ring and a desperate man trying to outrun his own emptiness. I didn't know how to do it right, he admitted. I didn't need perfect, she whispered. I just needed true. His hands trembled. And if I said, I'm still learning how to be true, then I'd say, she swallowed, took a breath. Show me. And he did. Right there, in a diner that smelled like burned coffee and second chances, Grayson West did the one thing he had never done. He dropped to his knees in front of the woman who was no longer pretending. No cameras, No contracts. Just him. Sophie knelt too, took his face in her hands. "I didn't leave because I didn't love you," she said. "I left because I did." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man who had been starving for years. Then he whispered, "Come home." She smiled through her tears. "I already am." Chapter 10. The Real Choice. It was raining again when they returned to the mansion. Same gray sky, same winding driveway, but everything felt different. Sophie stood at the threshold, staring up at the place where her heart had once fractured. Not from cruelty, but from confusion. From the coldness she mistook as control, from the man she'd almost believed couldn't feel. And now, he was standing beside her. Not as the CEO, not as the man with power. Power, just Grayson. Her fingers slipped into his. He looked down, surprised, like he still didn't quite believe she was real. "I don't need a key," she said quietly, "just a reason to stay." He nodded. "Let me give you one. Every day." They walked inside. No staff, no scripts, just silence, and the echo of everything that had led them here. Grayson didn't speak right away, he just led her through the house. Not to the penthouse suite, not to the guest wing, but down the back hallway. In the winter garden. He'd cleaned it, swept the stone, pruned the plants, lit the antique lantern she once said made the place feel like a fairy tale. She stepped inside and pressed her palm to her chest. "You remembered," she whispered. "I remembered everything," he said. They stood among the camellias, the rain tapping the glass above them, soft and steady. "I've been thinking," he said, clearing his throat, "about the contract. About all the rules I made to keep you at a distance. About the lies we wrapped around something that was never fake." She turned to face him. "Do you still have it?" she asked. "The contract?" He nodded. She stepped closer. "Then let's burn it." He blinked. Sophie smiled, that small, knowing smile that used to unnerve him and now anchored him. "I don't want to be part of your life because of a document," she said. "I want to choose you." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the same leather folder he had carried the first night. The one that started all of this. He opened it. There were only ashes inside. She looked up. "I burned it the night you left," he said softly. "'Cause I realized I didn't want anything between us but the truth." Her breath caught. She was quiet for a long time. Then, what now? Grayson looked at her like a man finally learning what it meant to hope. "Now," he said, "we build something real, with no promises except the ones we mean. No masks, no performances. And if I say I'm scared?" He stepped forward. "Then we'll be scared together." Weeks passed. Sophie didn't return to the diner. Grayson didn't return to the version of himself that only lived for the next deal. They built a rhythm, imperfect but theirs. She painted, he read beside her. They made burnt pancakes on Sundays and laughed when the smoke alarm screamed louder than they did. He learned to ask her how she was feeling. He learned to believe he meant it. They sat on the floor some nights, talking like old friends who had just met again. And one evening, as she folded laundry beside him, she said, "Do you still have the ring?" He paused. "The one from the gala?" She nodded. He got up, left the room, came back with the box. She opened it. Same simple gold band, no diamonds, no announcement, just the memory of a man on one knee who had finally let go of fear. She looked up. "I'm ready now," she said. And he knew she didn't mean just the ring. The wedding was small. The venue wasn't a ballroom. It wasn't a garden. It wasn't anything curated or cold. It was the diner, the same one where he found her wiping tables, wearing a name tag and a mask of indifference, where she'd taught him the meaning of real. Aunt Maggie cried through the vows. Stephanie smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. And when they kissed, it wasn't perfect, but it was true. Later, as they danced under string lights in the parking lot, Sophie whispered into his ear, "You really did choose me." He smiled against her temple. "No," he said, "we chose each other, together." They sat on the back porch of a house they'd built together. Not the mansion, not the penthouse. A home with chipped paint, a garden they'd planted themselves, and wind chimes Sophie picked out from a flea market. She rocked slowly on the porch swing, a sleeping baby tucked against her chest. Grayson stepped outside, a bottle in one hand, a blanket in the other. He wrapped it around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head. She looked up at him. "Do you remember what you said to me the night I disappeared?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "That I was looking for the girl I lost?" She shook her head gently. "No. You said you couldn't stop seeing me." He smiled. "And I still can't." They sat together in the quiet. Not perfect, but whole. And in the end, that was the real choice. Not the contract, not the money, not the mansion. Love, chosen, freely, together. Conclusion, the lesson. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be loved for who they are beneath the surface. But Sophie Lane? She stopped waiting. She hid, behind glasses, behind jokes, behind silence. Because life taught her that being seen was dangerous. And Grayson West? He wasn't born cold, he was taught to be. By betrayal, by loss, by people who only came close to take something away. They weren't supposed to fall in love. They were just supposed to pretend. But sometimes, the most powerful love stories are the ones that begin with lies and end with truth. Not the kind of truth written in contracts or whispered at galas, but the truth that happens in quiet kitchens, in rain-soaked doorways, in the way someone looks at you when you're wearing your worst clothes, saying nothing, and still, they stay. Because that's what love really is. It's not grand. It's not loud. It's not perfect. It's a choice. Made quietly, made daily, made bravely. What if the love of your life isn't someone who fixes you, but someone who stays while you're healing yourself? If this story found something hidden inside your heart, something tired, something soft, something waiting, then don't go just yet. Because the next story, it goes even deeper, and it might just be yours. See you there.